His fiancée humiliated the maid at a luxury party. Then the billionaire saw what she was doing, face screaming in fear, broken heart. Okay, at first, everything seemed normal. Chandeliers glowing above a ballroom full of diamonds and champagne. A woman in white, smiling for the cameras. A man in a red suit, watching the woman he was about to marry. Nobody in that room knew that in the next 60 seconds, one raised hand would change 4 lives forever. And when it happened, the only person who didn't look away was the richest man in the room. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know who's here with me tonight. This one is a story about pride, about a woman who had nothing but her dignity, and a man who had everything except someone who truly saw him. Stay until the end, because the twist in this one, nobody sees coming. Let's begin. Maya Bennett had learned a long time ago that the world didn't stop for grief. It kept moving, kept demanding, kept needing her hands to be useful even when her heart was breaking. She was 34 years old, a widow for the last 6 years, and the mother of an 11-year-old boy named Caleb who believed his mother could fix anything, a broken toy, a bad day, a leaking roof. What he didn't know was that some nights, after he fell asleep, Maya sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. She worked as a housekeeper for the Hale estate, a sprawling white mansion on the edge of Greenwich, Connecticut, owned by one of the most talked-about men in the country, Ethan Hale, a 34-year-old real estate and tech investor who had built an empire from nothing. Or so the magazine said. Maya had worked there for almost 2 years. She rarely saw Mr. Hale himself. He was busy, always in meetings, always flying somewhere. She mostly interacted with the estate manager, a stern but fair woman named Diane, and the rest of the household staff, a small, tired, loyal team who kept the mansion running like a quiet machine underneath all that glamour. Tonight was different. Tonight was the engagement party. Ethan was marrying Vanessa Cole, a 30-year-old socialite whose family owned half of Palm Beach and whose face had been on more magazine covers than Maya could count. The mansion had been transformed for the occasion, white orchids flown in from Ecuador, a live string quartet, a guest list of nearly 300 people, senators and celebrities and old money families who air-kissed each other and complimented dresses they secretly hated. Maya had been assigned to serve the West Wing, carrying trays of champagne and canapés between clusters of people who never once looked at her face. She didn't mind. She had long since made peace with being invisible in rooms like this. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant she could do her job, collect her paycheck, and go home to Caleb, who was waiting for her at her sister's apartment with his homework spread across the kitchen table. She moved carefully through the crowd, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes, weaving between silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Somewhere across the room, she caught a glimpse of Vanessa Cole in a white gown that probably cost more than Maya would earn in 5 years, laughing loudly at something a guest had said, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light like a small, cold sun. Near the far wall, half hidden by a marble column, Ethan Hale stood watching the party with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. Not quite happiness. Something closer to exhaustion, dressed up in a red suit and a practiced smile. Maya didn't know it yet, but before the night ended, that man would remember something he had spent 16 years trying to forget. And so would she. By 10 o'clock, the party had reached its loudest, brightest, most exhausting peak. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, refilling glasses before they were even empty. Maya's feet ached inside her flat black shoes, and her arms had started to tremble from holding trays for 3 hours straight. Still, she kept her face calm. Diane had trained all the staff the same way: smile, stay quiet, stay out of the photographs. It was near the dessert table that things started to go wrong. A guest, a tall man laughing too loudly at his own joke, stepped backward without looking. His elbow caught the edge of Maya's tray just as she was turning to refill a row of glasses. 3 flutes of champagne tipped, and a thin gold stream of wine splashed across the hem of a white gown standing just a few feet away. Vanessa Cole's gown. The room seemed to pause for half a second, the way rooms do right before something bad happens. Vanessa looked down at the pale gold stains spreading across the silk at her ankle, and her face, which had been glowing with camera-ready charm all evening, changed completely. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes turned sharp and cold. "Do you have any idea," Vanessa said, her voice rising just enough for the nearby guests to turn, "how much this dress cost?" "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Maya said quickly, already reaching for a napkin from her apron. "Let me help." "Don't touch me." Vanessa jerked back as though Maya's hand carried something contagious. A few guests nearby had stopped talking now, drawn by the sudden edge in Vanessa's voice. Somewhere across the room, a photographer hired for the event quietly lifted his camera. Maya kept her head down, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning, I promise." "You'll pay?" Vanessa let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it at all. "With what?" "Your tip money." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through a small circle of Vanessa's friends, the kind of laughter people give when they're afraid to disagree with the woman about to become their hostess for the next 50 years. Maya felt her face burn, but she said nothing. She had learned, over many years of service jobs, that silence was often the only shield a person like her was allowed to carry. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Her eyes swept over Maya, the plain black uniform, the tired lines under her eyes, the tray still trembling slightly in her hands, and something ugly settled into her expression. It was the look of a woman who had never once in her life been told no, and who had just found, in front of 300 important witnesses, the perfect place to remind everyone exactly where the line between us and them was drawn. She reached out and snatched the thin decorative cane resting against a nearby display table, an antique piece meant only for photographs, part of the party's old money decor theme. Across the room, half hidden behind a marble column, Ethan Hale set down his glass. Something in his chest had gone very still. Later, when people talked about that night, they would argue about how long it actually lasted. Some said it was over in 3 seconds. Others swore it felt like 3 full minutes. Maya only remembered the sound, the sharp crack of the cane cutting through the air, and then the party's suffocating hush, 300 people frozen mid-breath. Vanessa struck once, across Maya's shoulder, before anyone could move. "That's what you get," she said, loud enough for the room to hear, her voice shaking with something that looked almost like triumph, "for ruining everything I've worked for." Maya dropped to her knees, one hand raised instinctively over her head, the silver tray clattering to the marble floor. Champagne flutes shattered. A woman gasped. Someone's phone camera lifted. For a moment, nobody in that ballroom moved. And then Ethan Hale was walking. Not rushing, not shouting, his footsteps were slow and deliberate, the kind of slow that made people instinctively step out of his way. He crossed the ballroom floor in a silence so complete that his footsteps echoed off the marble. "Vanessa." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Put it down." "Ethan, she ruined my dress, I said put it down." Vanessa's hand opened. The cane clattered to the floor. For the first time all night, her practiced composure cracked, and underneath it was something closer to panic than apology. Ethan didn't look at her again. He knelt down on the marble floor in his $3,000 suit, in front of 300 of the wealthiest people in Connecticut, and gently helped Maya sit up. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" Maya shook her head, too stunned to speak, one hand still pressed against her shoulder. And it was in that moment, kneeling on the cold marble floor, staring into the face of the man she had worked for and barely ever seen up close, that something shifted behind Ethan's eyes. A flicker. A memory trying to surface after being buried for 16 years. He knew that face. Not from the mansion. Not from the last 2 years of passing her in hallways without really looking at her, the way rich men are trained not to look at the help. From somewhere far older. Somewhere colder. Somewhere before any of this. The estate, the empire, the red suit, had existed. "Maya," he said slowly, testing the name like it belonged to another lifetime. "Maya Bennett." Her eyes lifted to his, startled that he knew her full name at all. "You worked at a diner," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper now, the whole ballroom forgotten. On Route 9. 16 years ago. There was a kid who used to come in every night after the kitchen closed and sit in the corner booth and order nothing because he had nothing. And a waitress kept bringing him a bowl of soup anyway and telling the manager it was a mistake in the kitchen so he wouldn't get in trouble for eating it. Maya's breath caught somewhere in her throat. That was you, Ethan said. Wasn't it? The ballroom had gone so quiet that the string quartet, still standing frozen with their instruments half raised, could hear their own heartbeats. Maya stared at him, 16 years falling away in an instant. She remembered that boy. Of course she remembered him. Skinny, exhausted, wearing the same gray jacket every single night no matter the weather, always polite, always apologizing for taking up a booth when he wasn't ordering anything. She used to slip him soup, sometimes a roll, sometimes half a sandwich she claimed was about to be thrown out anyway. She never asked his story. She just knew hunger when she saw it, because she had seen it in the mirror too, back when her own family had nothing. He had disappeared one winter. She never knew what happened to him. She had thought about him sometimes over the years, hoped he'd found somewhere warm to sleep, and then, like most memories from a hard chapter of life, she had let him go. Ethan, she whispered now, and it wasn't a question anymore. It was recognition, slow and disbelieving. You were that boy. My father lost everything when I was 17, Ethan said quietly, still kneeling beside her, still holding her hand steady, oblivious to the 300 people watching. We lost the house. My mother got sick. I was sleeping in my car most nights behind that diner, and I hadn't eaten in 2 days before you put that first bowl of soup in front of me. You did that for almost 4 months. Every single night. And you never once made me feel small for needing it. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't given herself permission to cry all night. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know you became this. I changed my name back to my father's side of the family when I turned 18, Ethan said. Started over. Built a company out of a storage unit. I told myself if I ever made it, I'd find that diner and thank the woman who fed me when nobody else would look at me twice. His jaw tightened, his eyes finally leaving hers to sweep across the silent, staring crowd. And instead, for 2 years, I let you clean my house without ever once recognizing you. And tonight, I let someone raise a cane against you in my own home. He stood, slowly, and turned to face Vanessa, who had gone pale as the tablecloths behind her. Ethan, I didn't know she meant anything to you. I would never have. That's the problem, Vanessa. His voice was calm, but it carried across the entire ballroom like a verdict. You didn't need her to mean anything to me. You raised your hand against a person you believed had no power to stop you. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are when you think nobody important is watching. Somewhere near the dessert table, a guest's phone was still recording. The video would be online within the hour. The party did not end quietly. Vanessa's mother, a sharp-eyed woman in emerald silk, pushed through the crowd trying to salvage what could still be salvaged. Ethan, darling, let's not do this in front of everyone. We can discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss privately, Ethan said. Everyone already saw it. Vanessa's composure finally broke. She spilled wine on a $10,000 dress. You're going to end our engagement over a maid. The word landed in the room like a slap, and this time it was Ethan's expression that went cold. Say that again, he said quietly, and I promise you, you won't like what happens next. Vanessa didn't say it again. Instead, tears sprang to her eyes, practiced, camera-ready tears, the kind she'd used to get her way her entire life. But for the first time, nobody in the room rushed to comfort her. A few guests had already started quietly slipping toward the exits, phones in hand, whispering to each other. The Hale family's longtime housekeeper, Diane, stood near the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching Vanessa with an expression that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd seen the woman's true temper. Only the first time she'd seen it happen in front of an audience. Maya, meanwhile, wanted nothing more than to disappear. Her shoulder throbbed where the cane had struck her, but the pain in her chest was worse, the humiliation of having been struck in front of 300 strangers, and now the disorientation of being recognized, being seen. After years of being nobody in rooms exactly like this one. "I need to go home," she said quietly, gathering herself up off the floor despite Ethan's hand still hovering near her arm. "My son is waiting for me." "Maya, wait. Please." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I appreciate what you did. I do. But I don't want to be a scene at your party, Mr. Hale. I just want to go home." She walked out through the kitchen exit, past trays of untouched desserts, past the staff who stared at her with a mixture of shock and quiet solidarity, and out into the cold night air, where she finally allowed herself to cry, not because of the pain in her shoulder, but because for one unbearable moment, in front of everyone, she had been made to kneel. Behind her, in the ballroom, Ethan Hale stood in the wreckage of his own engagement party, and for the first time in 16 years, he understood exactly what he needed to do. Ethan found her 2 nights later, sitting on a bench outside her sister's apartment building, watching Caleb ride his second-hand bike in slow circles under a streetlight. She hadn't come back to work. She'd sent a short, formal resignation letter through Diane, apologizing for the disruption she caused, as though she had been the one who'd done something wrong. "You don't owe me an apology," Ethan said, sitting down beside her without asking permission, the same way he had once sat, uninvited, in a diner booth 16 years ago. "I owe you one. About 4 years' worth." Maya didn't look at him. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. You don't have to feel responsible for me because of something that happened when we were both different people. I'm not doing this out of guilt," he said. "I'm doing it because you're the only person who was ever kind to me for no reason at all. Not because I could do something for you. Not because I had money. You didn't know I'd ever amount to anything, and you fed me anyway." Caleb rode past them on his bike, gave Ethan a curious look, and kept going. "That's my son," Maya said softly. "Caleb. He's 11. "He's got your eyes," Ethan said, and for the first time in days, Maya let herself smile, just slightly. "His father passed away 6 years ago," she said. "Heart condition, out of nowhere. I've been doing what I can since then. It's not much, but it's honest work, and it kept a roof over his head." She finally turned to look at Ethan directly. "I'm not asking you for anything, Ethan. I don't want charity." "I'm not offering charity," Ethan said. "I'm offering you a job. A real one, running operations for the community foundation my company funds. Fair salary, full benefits, a say in decisions instead of standing silently in the background of other people's parties." He paused. "And I want to help with Caleb's schooling if you'll let me. Not as payment for the past. As what I should have already been doing for the woman who works 2 years in my own house, and I never once looked her in the eye until she was on her knees." Maya's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't humiliation behind the tears. It was something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time, the sense of being truly seen. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why does it take something like that for people like you to finally notice people like me?" It was a fair question. Ethan didn't have a comfortable answer, so he gave her an honest one instead. "It shouldn't," he said. "And I intend to spend a long time making that right." The video from the engagement party had, by then, been viewed more than 11 million times. Vanessa Cole's name trended for 4 straight days, not for her wedding, but for the sound of a cane cracking against a kneeling woman's shoulder. Old employees of the Cole family estate began speaking out, a former nanny, a former driver, a former stylist, each one describing years of the same cold cruelty the world had just witnessed in high definition. What had once been dismissed as "Vanessa just has high standards" now read very differently under public scrutiny. Her family issued a statement calling it an isolated moment of stress. The internet did not agree. Ethan formally ended the engagement 3 days after the party, through his lawyers, without ever speaking to Vanessa again in person. He didn't do it for public image, though the public certainly approved. He did it because somewhere in that ballroom, watching a woman he respected be struck to her knees, he had finally seen with total clarity the kind of person he had almost spent the rest of his life bound to. His mother, who had been quietly wary of Vanessa from the beginning, told him over the phone, "I always worried you chose her because she looked like the kind of woman a man like you was supposed to marry. Not because of who she actually was." "I know that now," Ethan admitted. Meanwhile, Maya started her new position at the Hale Family Foundation, overseeing a program that funded scholarships for children of single working parents, a program, she later learned, that Ethan had quietly created 2 years earlier and named, without ever telling anyone why, the Corner Booth Fund. She cried when she found out. Caleb, for his part, thought the whole thing was the most incredible story he'd ever heard. So Mom fed a homeless guy soup, and 16 years later, he saved her from a lady with a cane, he said one evening at dinner, eyes wide. That's like a movie. Life's stranger than movies sometimes, Maya told him, smiling for what felt like the first time in weeks, without any weight behind it. It wasn't a fairy tale overnight. Trust, once cracked, takes time to rebuild, even trust in good things. Maya struggled, in the early weeks, to accept the sudden shift in her life. She had spent years learning to be invisible, to keep her head down, to expect nothing from people with money and power. Being handed genuine respect felt, at first, almost as uncomfortable as the humiliation had. She caught herself apologizing for taking up space in meetings. She caught herself flinching when Ethan walked into a room, half expecting, out of old habit, to be told she didn't belong there. Ethan noticed, and he never rushed her. He simply kept showing up consistent, patient, never once treating her as a charity case or a headline. He asked her opinion in foundation meetings and actually listened to the answer. He remembered Caleb's parent-teacher conference dates before Maya did, not because he wanted credit, but because he'd promised to help and he intended to keep that promise the way nobody had ever kept promises to him during his hardest years. Slowly, something began growing between them that neither of them rushed to name. It wasn't built on the party, or the video, or the 11 million strangers who thought they understood their story. It was built on quiet dinners where Ethan helped Caleb with math homework at the kitchen table, on long conversations about the diner and the years in between, on the simple, steady discovery that they respected each other, not despite where they'd both come from, but because of it. Vanessa, for her part, tried one final attempt at damage control, a tearful television interview meant to repair her image, in which she claimed the moment had been taken out of context. But the full, unedited video had already told its own story, and no amount of careful lighting could undo what 300 witnesses and 11 million strangers had already seen with their own eyes. She quietly withdrew from public life a few months later, and the world, as it often does, moved on to its next headline. Maya and Ethan did not. A year later, the Hale Foundation held its annual gala in the very same ballroom where everything had changed. This time, Maya wasn't carrying a tray between the crowd. She stood at the front of the room in a simple navy dress, holding a microphone, introducing the year's scholarship recipients, 12 kids, all from working families, all given a chance most people in that room had never had to fight for. Caleb sat in the third row, 12 years old now, wearing a small suit that made him look, according to Ethan, like a tiny CEO, beaming with pride at his mother standing at the front of the room. Ethan watched from the side of the stage, the same way he'd watched from behind the marble column exactly 1 year earlier, except now, nothing about his expression was frozen or uncertain. It was steady. Sure. When Maya finished speaking, the room rose in applause, and this time, every single face was turned toward her, not through her, the way they once had. Later that night, on the same stretch of marble floor where she had once knelt in humiliation, Ethan found her again. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I keep thinking about that night," Maya admitted. "How close I came to just quietly disappearing after it happened. Going back to being invisible." "I'm glad you didn't," Ethan said. "Me too." She looked around the transformed ballroom, the same chandeliers, the same marble, entirely different meaning now. "It's strange. The worst moment of my life happened in this exact spot. And somehow it led to the best year I've had in a long, long time. Pain doesn't usually explain itself while it's happening," Ethan said softly. "Sometimes you only understand it looking backward." He didn't propose that night. It wasn't that kind of story, not yet. But he took her hand, in front of no cameras this time, no crowd, no headline waiting to be written, and simply stood beside her, the way he wished someone had stood beside her 16 years and one very long year ago. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this: the way we treat the people who serve us, who help us quietly, who ask for nothing in return. That says more about our character than every dollar in our bank account ever could. Vanessa Cole had everything the world tells us to want: wealth, beauty, status, and in one unguarded moment, she showed the world exactly what those things had cost her: her kindness, her humility, her ability to see another human being as anything other than beneath her. Maya Bennett had almost nothing the world measures as valuable, and yet 16 years ago, with nothing to gain, she gave a hungry stranger a bowl of soup and a little dignity on his worst nights. She never once expected it to come back to her. That's what made it real. And Ethan Hale, for all his success, learned the hardest lesson of his life in the space of about 10 seconds, that the true measure of a person isn't how they treat you when you're powerful enough to help them, but how they treat someone who they believe can do nothing for them at all. So if you take one thing away from this story tonight, let it be this: be kind, even when nobody important is watching. Especially then. You never know whose life you're quietly holding up, or whose life might one day hold up yours. If this story touched you tonight, give it a like. It truly helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like more stories like this one, and if someone in your life needs to hear this message today, share it with them. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.